To the world, Betty White was the picture of joy, humor, and timeless charm. She was America's grandma, a national treasure whose smile could light up any room, and whose sharp wit outlasted generations of changing comedy. From the Mary Tyler Moore Show to the Golden Girls and even Hot in Cleveland, her career spanned over 8 decades, filled with laughter, accolades, and adoration. But behind the smiles and wisecracks, Betty White carried something with her for most of her life. Something deeply personal, profoundly private, and completely unknown to the public. Now, years after her passing in 2021 at the age of 99, her family has finally come forward to share a secret that even some of her closest friends never knew, and it changes everything. The nation's sweetheart Betty White had an image that felt almost mythical. She was funny without being crude, sharp without being mean. Whether delivering deadpan lines as Rose Nilland or roasting celebrities on late-night talk shows, she had a unique talent for making people feel happy just by being herself. She also had the gift of longevity, not just in her career but in spirit. Until the very end, she remained a vibrant, engaged, and curious soul. In fact, many fans were convinced she'd make it to 100, and when she passed just weeks before her centennial birthday, the loss felt like the closing of a precious chapter in American pop culture. But for all the joy she gave, there was something Betty kept hidden. Not out of shame, but out of protection. She didn't want sympathy, said a close family member now speaking publicly for the first time. She wanted people to laugh. That was always more important to her than talking about pain. The secret she carried for decades. So what was Betty White's biggest secret? According to her family, Betty lived much of her life with deep, quiet grief over a child she lost and never spoke about publicly. The story, kept private for nearly 70 years, began in the early 1950s, during Betty's first marriage to Hollywood agent Lane Allen. While the marriage was short-lived, it lasted only 2 years. It left a scar that never quite healed. She was pregnant very early on, and she miscarried, her niece revealed. She was devastated, but she didn't talk about it. She threw herself into work almost immediately. The miscarriage happened quietly, far from the public eye, at a time when such things were rarely discussed even among close friends. Betty never had children of her own after that. She loved animals, she loved people, and she loved kids, but she kept that part of herself locked away, said a longtime friend. None of us knew. Looking back, you can see hints of it in some of her performances, a sadness she never let show fully. She kept it buried. Why she kept it hidden? Betty's decision not to speak about her miscarriage or her struggles with fertility wasn't out of shame. It was about control. She never wanted to be defined by loss, her family member explained. She wanted to be known for her strength, her kindness, and her laughter. She didn't want to bring people down. Betty also came from a generation that didn't talk openly about grief, especially women in the public eye. Hollywood expected its actresses to be poised, polished, and perfect. Betty knew that any sign of vulnerability might be misunderstood or exploited. She told me once that comedy was her armor, her friend recalled. When she was sad, she worked harder. She performed harder. It's how she survived. Life filled with love, but also loneliness, despite the loss early in life and her choice never to remarry after the death of her third husband, Alan Ludden, in 1981. Betty White always projected warmth. She claimed she was content without children, often saying she was mother to animals and godmother to many. But her family now admits that privately, she sometimes reflected on the life she could have had. She would never say she had regrets, said a longtime family friend. But every once in a while when we were alone, she'd say, I wonder what it would have been like to be a mom. That's as far as she'd go. She poured her maternal instincts into her nieces and nephews, becoming a second mother to many in the extended White family. And of course, she dedicated much of her life to animal welfare, supporting rescue shelters and wildlife conservation efforts with the same passion others gave their children. The quiet tributes now that the truth has come out, some fans are revisiting her work and noticing subtle, touching clues that hinted at this hidden lost. In a 1985 Golden Girls episode, Rose talks about the death of her husband Charlie. Her grief in the scene is palpable, almost too real for a sitcom. Betty wasn't acting, one castmate later said. She was pulling from somewhere very deep. I didn't know it at the time, but now I think she was letting some of that pain out. Even in her interviews, there were signs. When asked in the 1990s why she never had children, she simply smiled and said, "It just didn't happen for me." But her eyes would sometimes drift, her tone soften. Now those who knew her best realized she was holding something sacred. Final message from the family. Betty White's family hesitated for years to share this part of her life story. They wanted to respect her privacy and honor the image she so carefully built. But with time and the growing cultural shift toward openness about grief, they decided it was time. She wouldn't have wanted a spotlight on her sadness, her niece said. But she also believed in helping people. And if sharing this helps someone else who suffered loss, especially the kind you carry alone, then she'd be okay with that. They hope fans will see Betty not just as a comedian or a performer, but as a full person. Someone who knew deep pain but chose joy anyway. She wasn't perfect, her friend added, but she was real. And brave. And human. A legacy now even more powerful in many ways. This revelation only deepens Betty White's legacy. It reminds us that behind the flawless comedic timing and perpetual optimism was a woman who knew sorrow and who chose laughter as her path forward. That kind of resilience is rare. That kind of courage is unforgettable. And maybe that's the biggest lesson she left us. She once said in an interview, "If you're lucky enough to be happy, don't waste it. Share it, make people smile. That's what we're here for." Now we know that Betty White made people smile not despite her pain, but because of it. She knew what sadness felt like. She just chose not to stay there. The end of an era, the beginning of understanding. As we continue to look back on Betty White's astonishing life, the full picture is finally beginning to emerge. She was more than the Golden Girl, more than the television icon. She was a woman who carried heartbreak quietly, who gave more than she took, and who never let grief dim her light. The next time we see her delivering a one-liner or flashing that signature grin, we'll see something more. A woman who walked through the darkest parts of life with grace and gave the world her brightest self anyway. And maybe, just maybe, that's her biggest secret of all.